So since we have a quick thumbs up that everyone can see and hear me, I'm happy to welcome you to this Spark workshop on Academic Conferencing 101. I'm going to be taking us through some of the fundamentals of academic conferencing and also some pro tips. This session is being put on by the Feminist Collaboratory and the CRYPT Lab at the University of Alberta, which are both housed in the Media and Technology Studies unit. For those of you who signed up, this workshop is going to be oriented largely towards students in humanities fields and digital humanities fields in particular, but it should be relevant for all of you. And I really appreciate you filling out the pre-workshop survey. It was super helpful to have your questions, and I've tried to tailor this as much as I can to the specific queries and experiences y'all are looking to understand. So with that said, welcome again. Spark is the Scholarly Professionalization and Radical Knowledge series that is run by myself and Dr. Nicolette Little. Our next workshop, we actually have one coming up next week on how to build an academic CV. We are going to be recording that one, but I do believe it has filled up for the in-person registration. So sorry in advance, but the recording for that will be coming out at some point soon. And then later in March, and we'll be announcing this in the next week or so, we'll be running a workshop on intro to data scraping with Peter over at the Digital Scholarship Center. So some things to keep an eye out for. Really quickly, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. P.B. Berge. I'm a game and media scholar in the Media and Technology Studies program. I'm an assistant professor of experimental game design, and I am here because I have given dozens and dozens of conference presentations at all sorts of venues across disciplines. I've presented at technical conferences, I presented workshops, you name it. But I actually don't think this is what makes me qualified to be the one running this workshop. I think the real thing that makes me qualified to be doing this is that I was, rather recently, if you can imagine, a graduate student myself, and I have been in all of your shoes and had to navigate the weirdities of pandemic and post-pandemic conferencing. And so I'm going to be sharing some like very real on the ground and recent experience with how I learned to academic conference. And also in anticipation of this event, I did have the opportunity to interview a handful of professors across media and technology studies and gender and social justice for their pro tips on academic conferencing, and I'm weaving them in here as well. One of the big things, which y'all pointed out in your survey, is that academic conferencing involves a lot of hidden rules, little faux pas, and secret things that nobody talks about. Full disclosure, I'm autistic. I don't do well with hidden rules that nobody talks about. So I learned them, and I am now able to articulate them to you so that you don't have to play the weird guessing game of learning how these things work. So here's a breakdown of what we're going to be talking about today. First and foremost, please, I encourage you as we go along here to ask questions. I've got the chat open. I'll be following along. And if at any point you have a question about something, feel free to pop it in the chat and I'll do my best to respond as we go. Likewise, I'm going to be sharing in just a couple of minutes here a resource packet that we're making available alongside this event. So don't feel like you have to keep up with all of the information that I'm giving you here. We'll also be making the recording of this talk available to everyone after the event. Which brings me to the next important point. This talk is being recorded. None of you are being recorded, just me and the slideshow. But if at any point you do opt to speak and share a question later on, just know that that will turn up in the recording. So if you want that edited out of the recording, please let me know that in advance. In terms of the subjects we're going to be covering, I'm going to take us through a bit of an introduction. We're going to go over the terms and timelines for conferences. We're going to go over the essentials. And then I've broken down the How to Survive unit into talking about CFPs and abstracts, the presentation itself, the conference, networking, and then we'll have some frequently asked questions and final pro tips at the end. It was my hope that we'd have a little bit of time to do an abstract workshop at the end, and I had asked a handful of you to bring abstracts for today. I'm hoping we'll have time for that. But I'm going to be honest, we expected to get about 20 to 25 participants today, and we had 60 folks register. So we're going to see if we have time. Y'all had some really wonderful questions, and I want to make sure we have a chance to get through all of the content. So if you don't have time, that's okay. But hopefully we'll have a chance to look at a couple of abstracts. Feeling good? Okay. In that case, on we go. So there are a handful of you who are just now learning what a conference is as you start out in your academic careers. Some of you are seasoned pros already looking to pick up some tips. So I'm going to kind of crash through a lot of the basics of academic conferencing and what's involved. Again, if you have questions, stop me. I can manage the chat as we go. So this is the life cycle of an academic conference from your perspective as a researcher. The very first thing that happens is that an academic organization is going to put out what's called a CFP, or a call for proposals. This is where they solicit submissions in advance of a conference. CFPs have all of the details that you need to know for a conference: when it is, when abstracts and submissions are due, what the requirements are for abstracts and submissions. Most conferences will also have themes and suggested topics, and some will also have templates for submission. Next up, you're going to draft and submit an abstract, paper, or panel proposal for consideration. You're going to submit that before the deadline, ideally, listed on the CFP. That said, I'm going to let y'all in on a little pro tip, and don't quote me on this if it doesn't work out for you. 90% of the time, academic organizations will push back the deadlines on conference submissions at least once. I don't know why they do this. I don't know why this has become the standard across virtually all of academia. But in general, if there's a deadline for when CFPs are due, it is very common for an academic organization to then delay that deadline by 1 week, usually at the 11th hour, just to give people who are finishing up their proposals a little bit of grace. After submission, you then await review. This is obviously the worst part of the process. Abstracts and papers are evaluated via peer review and in some cases chair review. Accepted papers are placed into panels, and we'll get into what panels are in just a minute. And assuming all of that goes well, and it will go well because I'm sure everyone in here is smart and brilliant and capable, and because you came to this workshop, we move into the next part, which is you got accepted. Hooray. Now comes the perhaps equally stressful part that follows, because if this is an in-person conference, this means you're now prepping for travel. The moment you get an acceptance for a conference, you're going to want to run tell your supervisor, because now there are things like applying for travel grants and travel funding to make sure that you can get hopefully some support from the university or from graduate and postdoctoral studies to go to this conference and present your work. During this time, you'll also be preparing a presentation of your work. This is obviously where most of the work comes in. Talks for academic conferences are usually 10 to 20 minutes. They're mostly 15 minutes. We'll talk about this more in just a moment. And your talk will almost certainly be part of a panel. In general, you'll have about 2 months, sometimes more, sometimes less, to prepare this talk. Ultimately, then, all that's left is to actually attend the conference and give your talk. That's the fun and exciting part after you've endured many months of stress and preparation. So let's take care of some of the key vocabulary before we get into the specific tips and strategies. Conferences vary, but generally conferences are composed of a few different kinds of events. First and foremost, we have things called keynotes or plenary talks. Almost every conference has them, and this is where invited guest speakers are brought in and paid usually an exorbitant amount of money to give an extended talk to the entire organization. These are intended to set the tone for the whole conference, and usually everybody who can comes. The idea is that folks will be discussing the keynote talks over the duration of the entire conference and kind of using them as a point of reflection in their own work. Conferences will also have workshops, which are longer interactive sessions with limited participants. These events often have tangible outputs. So you might go to a workshop, for example, on integrating research practices into the classroom, something like that, where you spend a handful of hours with folks in a room trying to strategize how to actually implement these things in your classes, things like that. Conferences also have roundtables and fish bowls. These events are less formal than panels. They bring together folks, sometimes outside of academia, and they field questions from a moderator or from the audience directly. A huge part of conferences, weirdly, is meals and social events. These are baked into pretty much every conference, and many senior scholars in the field will choose what conferences they go to based on whether or not there are restaurants in that city that they want to visit. That's how integral these things are. I'm not saying that's like a good criteria for decision. I'm just saying it's a big part of academic conferencing is sitting down and having food with people because you are gathering a bunch of humans in meat space, and you have to sustain yourself. You have to eat. So you might think about meals and lunches and after conference dinners and things as a part of the conferencing experience and program. And then finally, the most important and crucial component are the panels, sometimes called sessions themselves. Now, as graduate students, there are a few other things you may see from time to time at conferences that are especially important for you to pay attention to. The first of these is what are called doctoral colloquiums. These are opportunities for PhD students to share their dissertation work in progress and receive feedback from mentors and colleagues. And these are really valuable networking and mentorship opportunities for those of you who are in graduate programs. Sometimes master's students can participate in these if you're doing a master's thesis, but it is a little bit less common. Some conferences, and this is less common in the humanities, will also have poster sessions where students break their studies down into visual material, stand next to their poster in a poster hall. We don't see a lot of those in the humanities, and they won't be our focus today. But if this is something that's really important to conferences you're a part of, UA's research office has some really good resources on creating academic posters. And finally, for those of you in media and technology research, some conferences will have exhibitions or an arcade where you can demo research creation works. So if you're involved in making games or robots or physical artworks, even things like sculptures and performance pieces, looking for conferences that offer exhibition opportunities is also really important. Of course, regardless of the conference you're going to, the most important thing is panels. Panels generally consist of 3 to 5 speakers, although 4 is most common, presenting each for about 15 to 20 minutes. At the end of each of those presentations, and I mean all of them together, there is a collective Q&A where the audience attending the panel can ask questions of the presenters. Sometimes the Q&A can follow the individual talk, but in general, that's the gist. People give presentations, then there's a Q&A. When I say that these talks are 15 to 20 minutes, I mean they are exactly 15 or 20 minutes, depending on what the standard for the conference is. Never exceed your allotted time for presenting. I'm just going to mention that up front. It will come up again later. The only way you can have a really truly horrible conferencing experience is if you do try to go over your time allotment and you have the chair of your panel tell you to stop talking. It's very uncomfortable, and I pray it never happens to any of you. On that note, panels usually have a chair who introduces each speaker, enforces time, and moderates the session. Panels are generally arranged by the organizing committee based on topical similarity between submitted abstracts. So you'll submit a paper to the conference. They'll take a look at all of the papers that they got. They'll group those papers loosely into panels, and then you'll meet with your panel and present with them on the day of your talk. That said, for many conferences, panels can actually be pre-constituted. Ooh, there's 2 B's there. Nice typo. where the whole panel is proposed in advance. Pre-constituted panels are actually more likely to be accepted in academic conferences, but they involve a little bit of upfront work. Rather than submitting just your paper, you get 3 friends together, or 3 colleagues, or your supervisor and you and some colleagues at another institution, and you all collectively propose the entire panel, the panel theme, and the panel abstract, and then each of your individual talks. I also should note that pre-constituted panels are more likely to be accepted if they include scholars from multiple institutions and at multiple career stages. This is important because we see this a lot where a group of graduate students from the same institution will all form a panel together and then propose it. That is a good strategy, but it's less likely to be successful than if you manage to get somebody from a different department or somebody from a different institution involved in your project. Okay. Now, what do we look for when we're looking at CFPs? Something really important to consider is that conferences vary quite a bit. And so I'm going to point out a couple of things to look for as you examine conferences in your field. First, there's a special kind of conference called a proceedings conference. Although it's more common in technical fields, proceedings conferences are a phenomenal opportunity for graduate students. Proceedings conferences require you to submit a full paper for consideration. And if accepted, you not only present the paper at the conference, but the proceedings conference will actually publish that paper in the conference proceedings. And I'm flagging that for you right now because that's a huge opportunity for graduate students. You get a presentation and a paper, 2 in 1. It's incredibly efficient, and the publishing timeline for proceedings conferences is much quicker than it is for academic journals. So when you hear that a conference has published proceedings, I want your ears to perk up. This is something to keep an eye out for. That said, there are other things that we need to look for. What is the scope of a conference? Conferences can generally be categorized as internal, regional, national, or international. And smaller conferences tend to be the best for networking and like first conference experiences, but larger conferences are considered to be more prestigious. That said, larger conferences, and when I say large, I mean they can get in the size of thousands of people. At that big, they might be kind of terrible for networking. It's really hard to have like human one-on-one interactions with people when there are thousands of folks at a conference. So there's pros and cons to both. We'll talk a bit about both of them. But I want to point out things like here where I've highlighted the PCA, or the Popular Culture Association, for example, has a national conference every year that can get up into the hundreds, if not thousands, of attendees. But they also have regional conferences scattered across North America that are much, much smaller. And those regional conferences are usually a lot more welcoming to emerging scholars than the national conference can be. So knowing the scope of the conference you're getting involved with can be really, really important. If you're heading to a big conference, the next thing to look for is if that conference might have sub-organizations, like a special interest group, also called a SIG. These can help you find your people even amid a conference of thousands of participants. And finally, I do want to note that being able to attend physical conferences is a great opportunity. It's also a little bit of a privileged one. If your department has limited funding, or you're juggling work or parenting or care responsibilities or disability, or if ongoing geopolitical events might prevent you from traveling to certain regions, I think that's the best way I can phrase that. That can really discourage folks from going to conferences who otherwise might want to. The good news here is that during the pandemic in particular, a number of conferences pivoted to online modes, and many now maintain hybrid opportunities. In the table of conferences I'll give you shortly, I've tried to highlight a handful of virtual conferences that are really appealing. Virtual conferencing does have its benefits and drawbacks. I was primarily a PhD student during the during lockdown in the pandemic. And the big pro to that is virtual conferencing requires no travel. You can string up, at one point, I think I had 3 different academic conferences in different parts of the world in the same week. But because they were virtual, I was able to attend them all. And it also makes things much more affordable, but it can make networking a bit of a challenge. So we'll talk about how to kind of weigh those pros and cons and make it work for you. So with that, let's start with the essentials. These are the things you're absolutely going to need to do anything related to academic conferencing. And thing number one here is that you need your team and they need you. Conferencing is all about people. It's all about meeting the folks in your field, but it's also about learning to work with the folks around you and build community in your discipline. So when I say your team, I mean 2 people with an asterisk. Person number 1 is your supervisor or supervisors. Even if your supervisor isn't on site for a conference, you want to ensure that they're remotely available and or that there is someone on site who has agreed to be your interim check-in person. When my students go to a conference, especially if I'm sending them, if I'm not going to that conference, I am telling them who their stand-in academic parent is. Especially if it's your first conference, you want to make sure that you have somebody who you can check in with and say, hey, I just got a really weird question at my panel. Is this normal? Did I handle that okay? You need somebody with experience who can kind of help take point here. The other person who will be essential and who I'll be referencing at a few points here is your conference buddy. This may be a friend, a colleague, another graduate student, ideally, who you'll team up with for excursions. If you're going off site, you're going to do some sightseeing in the city, or you just need somebody to take glamorous photos of you during your panel, you need a buddy. You need one person who you can count on reliably throughout the conference. It is also fine if you have multiple conference buddies. Y'all can start a group chat. I don't care how you do it. Just make sure you have at least one go person. Okay? The responsibilities that your supervisor brings to this, there's a few of them. Number 1, your supervisor should look over your talk prior to the presentation and ideally give feedback to you directly, or they should coordinate a time for you to give a mock talk in advance of the conference. And some of you might be thinking, my supervisor has never done that for me, and I've been to conferences before. That's why I'm telling you what your supervisor's responsibilities are. So you can ask for those things because this is their job. Likewise, your supervisor will ideally make introductions for you if you have people on your wish list that they know already. By your wish list here, I mean if there are people at this conference that you're really hoping to meet or would like to meet, you can ask your supervisor to make an introduction for you. We'll talk about that a little more later when we talk about networking. Ideally, your supervisor is also standing by if something goes awry and you need support. You drop your laptop out of your hotel window or your PowerPoint gets deleted. You need somebody that you can go to. Your supervisor is also the person who's going to answer any questions not covered by this workshop. Your buddy, on the other hand, is there to make sure that you aren't stuck alone at events or while traveling off-site. They'll also make sure to capture beautiful photos of you during your talk for us to use on your social accounts. You may notice, by the way, as we go through the presentation, I have lots of photos of conferences here. Many of these are my students, past, present, who have had their conference buddy take glamorous photos of them during their panels. So hopefully this will give you some inspiration for what this can look like. Your buddy's also there to manage your pre-presentation anxiety about your slides and or outfit and or how nervous you look. Bear in mind that you are also the buddy in this situation to this person. You're expected to fulfill all these responsibilities in return. The second thing I want to emphasize is that for every conference, you need clear goals. Otherwise, how will you decide if your conference experience was successful? And I see this all the time because I will ask students who went to a conference, I'll say, how did it go? How was the conference? And they'll be like, I have no idea. I went to lots of panels. I did lots of things. Is that right? Is that good? Like, I don't know how to gauge the quality of interactions that I had. So before you go to a conference, you should set some really goals for yourself to determine how you'll know whether or not a conference is ultimately successful. Anyway, I'm going to introduce you to the rule of thumb that I use for my graduate students when they're heading to their first conference. So this is PB's one and done rule. In deciding what your goals are for a conference, here's my recommendation for where to start. I will attend one valuable panel or event each day. I will ask one good question at a panel, and I will make one new friend. Those are the goals that I recommend setting for yourself before your first conference. And if you're like, that feels like kind of a low bar, good, that's fine. As long as these things happen, when you walk away from the conference, you can call it a success, as long as you did those things. That way, you're also making sure that you're balancing the different responsibilities of being at a conference and not getting too tunnel vision on did I make as many friends as possible or did I go to as many panels as possible, thinking that that's the threshold for success. Alrighty, so with that all said, let's turn now to the CFP. And bear in mind, again, I'll just remind y'all, if you have questions about any of the things I'm saying, feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll just keep moving. Okay, so CFPs, calls for proposals. So I have two kind of categories of strategies for this. Number one is getting in the loop on CFPs. This is one of the most important things. The worst thing that can happen to you is that you find out that this super relevant, very cool conference just happened a month ago and you didn't know about it. So item number one is to plug yourself into the academic communities who are going to let you know that these events are happening. My recommendation here is to join academic listservs, which are email lists, Discord servers, and to follow academic organizations on social media to make sure that you're notified of conferences when they come up. You can also set a standard in your lab, program, or department to collaboratively share CFPs. My lab, for example, and I'll show in a minute, has a CFP tracker, and I really recommend making one of these for yourself. Here's a little glance at what this looks like. So in my lab, we actively track CFPs when they come online. When a conference puts them out, we put it immediately into the spreadsheet and we tag everybody else in the lab so that they know that it's happening. We note the deadline, we provide a link to the CFP, and we provide some cursory notes on what the themes are, what things people might want to know if they're applying. Having something like this can be a lifesaver because if you've got a project and you're trying to figure out where do I submit this project, first thing you can do is open up your CFP tracker, and it helps build community and make sure nothing is slipping through the cracks. I'm providing a template of this to you all, by the way, if you want to just copy the formatting that we use, but deploy it in your own lab or department. The second thing is for forming panels and pitching projects. My biggest recommendation here, and this was echoed by many of my colleagues in the advice that they gave for y'all, is to host mock paper presentations in your program. If a number of you are going to be attending the same conference, it absolutely makes sense for you to potentially band together and give a mock panel presentation to each other. Likewise, you can facilitate abstract swaps and workshops with others in your department and program. And then I really recommend checking Discords and listservs, and forums for open panel calls. Anytime a CFP goes live, there are going to be folks out there who don't have someone for a panel. Maybe they have 2 people or 3 people, and they're looking for a 3rd and 4th panelist. And they will circulate calls for fellow panelists. They might be like, hey, we're putting together a panel on environmental media. Anybody out there working on that? And if you happen to be working in that area, you might stumble across that on the Discord or a listserv, be able to introduce yourself and be like, hi, wow, work sounds fascinating. I happen to have a project that fits exactly in this area. Next thing you know, you're not only submitting to a conference, you're part of a pre-constituted panel. So that's an example CFP tracker. But let's talk a little bit about the abstract. The abstract needn't be so abstract. When you put together an abstract in response to a CFP, which is the most common kind of submission, there's a couple of things you really need that abstract to do. Number one, your abstract should clarify the what, who, how, and why of your project. Ideally in that order, but not necessarily. What is the thing you're writing about? Who cares? How are you intervening? And why does this matter to the field? Those are the questions you're fundamentally asking. Ideally, your abstract should also speak as though the work is already done or underway. And this is something that graduate students often struggle with, in part because there's a lot of imposter syndrome and it's really real. And you might be like, here's an idea I'm starting to begin to maybe think about. But that's not the genre of the abstract. In the abstract, you're going to speak as though you've done all of the work already. And then finally, an abstract should move through these three phases. It should open with context and then clearly deliver its intervention. It should then end with a discussion of the project's impetus, which is why attendees will care. And I've provided a handful of sample abstracts to you. We'll be looking at them momentarily, hopefully. But you'll notice in all of them, they move through these three steps. The what, who, how, and why. Sometimes abstracts can get away with not addressing all of those questions precisely, but a successful abstract will almost always include those three things I list in the third bullet here. Okay, that's enough about CFPs. Let's talk about the presentation itself. So when you're preparing a talk, there's a handful of ways that you can do it. Many folks will write of a conference paper, as it's often called. You could also call it a script for their talk, and they'll often do this before drafting the presentation content. For many of you, presentation here might be synonymous with slides, but back in the old days of academic conferencing, there was no PowerPoint, no Google Slides, no Slides Go. It was folks reading papers aloud to one another. If that sounds miserable, my understanding is it kind of was. Sometimes they had document cameras, which I guess makes it slightly better. These days, slides are pretty mandatory, but whether or not you do the slides before or after writing the script is totally up to you. A good rule of thumb when you're trying to figure out how long to make this paper or script is that a 15-minute talk will equate roughly to a 7.5-page paper. And that's double space, 12-point font, Times New Roman. And this is because folks expect reading a single double-spaced page will take about 2 minutes of time. Obviously, though, your reading pace may differ, but that's a good rule of thumb to start with. If you're writing a conference paper and you crack 10 pages and you've got a 15-minute time limit, there's a problem. Now, some folks, on the other hand, prefer to draft their talk directly into the slideshow. This is also fine. Either way, I'm going to give you a couple of tips. Number one is that short sentences are your friend. A lot of my students who translate their academic papers into talks struggle with this. We love semicolons, we love run-on sentences, we love lists. It's very hard for people to keep those things in their head in an auditory format. So short sentences are your friend. And then finally, regardless of whatever approach you take, you should aim to time and rehearse your talk at least 4 to 5 times prior to presenting. That might sound bananas. It is a little bananas, but believe me, it will make it so much easier to deliver your content with confidence and knowing that you will not go over that time limit. With that said, it also really helps to know what kind of a talk you're giving. And I think that generally speaking, academic talks for conferences can be broken down into 2 very broad categories. Some folks might be presenting talks concerning projects that they've recently started. Frankly, this can sometimes be projects that we've thought about starting. For such a talk, you have some specific goals. Number one is that you want to discover the academic conversations and communities that already exist around your subject. Number two is that you want to collect feedback that is going to help you refine your idea, methods, plan, language, or concepts. And number three is that you might want to recruit potential collaborators or co-conspirators, other people who are thinking about this idea. Now, some folks might be presenting talks concerning projects that they've recently completed or which are fully underway. If you've written an entire paper for a class or as part of a research project and now you're taking it to a conference, that's going to look very different than that first scenario. So for you, you're going to want to cultivate advanced interest in and promote your study. You're going to rock in there and be like, here's this kick-ass thing I did and why you need to care about it. Number two is you're going to want to check your work for possible oversights or missteps. You might be about to submit that work somewhere. And if there's an author or an area of study you're missing, you really want to make sure you're aware of it. Three, you want to establish your project as part of your research practice. You want to make it clear to everyone where you fit into this larger picture. And number four, you want to practice discussing the subject with audiences. It could very well be a big research project. You might be breaking down into a few small conference papers. And it's good to get practice then having conversations with lay audiences about your subject. So a couple of clear strategies then for either of these projects. And I want you to kind of picture in your mind a project you might be thinking about pitching to a conference. So if that project is relatively new, but you're trying to develop it towards a conference presentation, here are some tips on how to do that. Really focus on your methodology and your literature review and your study design. You can use these to clarify how you're intending to intervene in the ongoing conversation. You also want to be open about the work you're planning to do. With the CFP and abstract, we wanted to be blindly confident. We wanted to be like, yeah, here's all the work I've done. But what's weird about that is when we get to the actual presentation, it's okay to say, these are exploratory concepts I'm thinking through as I design my study. Or the framework I'm proposing here is new and I'm very open to feedback. That's totally fine to say. That said, you will want to present some kind of tangible evidence of your progress, even if you don't have full findings yet. You can show us your preliminary findings, your prototypes, hunches, working concepts, or initial conclusions. For those of you who have more thorough or recently completed projects, again, our approach here is going to be a little bit different. Number one, you're going to want to hit the key highlights from each part of the study. You're going to walk us through each part of the paper step by step, but really focus on the key findings. Don't get bogged down in the literature review and only cover enough of the methodology to clarify what steps you took. An example here would be saying, while I don't have enough time to cover all the specifics of this study, I want to cover some highlights. Zoom us in to the point of focus for you. Likewise, you want to make it abundantly clear where and how one can find and access the research and when, if forthcoming. If you're submitting this to journals, tell us that. Be like, I'm shortly sending this out for review so that people know to, in about 6 or 7 months, see if the study has come out so that they can cite it. If the study is out, put it everywhere. Put it on a QR code, print it out and hand it to people. Your goal at that conference is going to be make sure as many people know about your research as possible. You also want to clarify and drive home the scope of the work and how scholars can make use of it in their own studies. Really drive home the things that make it impressive. Saying things like, we ended up surveying over 3 dozen people, or we hope our methodology will be useful for other scholars interested in X, Y, and Z. And finally, and this is the most important thing, drive home the emerging impacts of the work. Even if your study is recent, what is taking place as a result, either in the field or in your research program? So saying something like, I'm now looking to explore these ideas further in a new study I'm designing, building on X, Y, and Z. Think of this as putting, your name will return, like they do at the end of the Avengers movies. You're making it clear that this is a part of a larger research program that you are cultivating. With that all said, here's the must-knows about the talk itself. which seems like the most stressful part of this, but for many of you, hopefully it won't be. Um, Here's a couple best practices though, because I know it can be incredibly nerve-wracking, and for what it's worth, I threw up a good handful of times before my first academic presentation. In general, the talk itself should do the following. It should follow the structure of a paper, section to section. Take us through an introduction, tell us the literature you're engaging, tell us what methods you're using, give us your findings, your conclusions, and your analysis. It should also present a clear overview of the project at the front end. You don't necessarily have to read us the abstract, but you don't just want to open cold turkey. Tell us what you are going to be sharing with us today so we can situate ourselves. And thirdly, it should situate the project alongside your broader research practice. Don't forget to introduce yourself and who you are. This project isn't the only thing you'll ever do. Make that clear. You must generally have slides. Those slides should not be blank. Please, I beg you. This is also where my advice may differ from folks you may talk to in your home departments, in part because well, I got my PhD fairly recently, and I grew up in the academic conferencing era where we're competing with TikTok and Instagram for people's attention at all times. And so, in my experience, it pays to put a little bit of love into the graphical design and the flashiness and the attention grabbing elements of a presentation. Some of your mentors may believe that all of that is vapid and foolish and unnecessary and distracting. But in my experience, those things do matter. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But ideally, your presentation should include at least a few jokes, anecdotes, funny clips, GIFs, or flavor. These should be tested in advance. You may have heard advice before to never put jokes in a presentation. I firmly disagree. You should not put untested jokes in a presentation. If you're going to include elements of humor, and I encourage you to do so, it helps engage the audience, make you come off as cordial and collaborative and charismatic. You can test those. You can lab those in advance with your peers. It might sound kind of weird, but that's a part of the game. And then finally, the talk can be scripted. It must be timed and rehearsed. If you're presenting conferences virtually, you have the advantage of being able to have your notes on your monitor very close to your webcam, to the point people might not even know that you're reading a script. So there's a lot of advantages there. If you're presenting in person, reading off of a clear script, some people can do that very well and very charismatically. Some people, it ends up just making it harder for them to get through the material. So figure out what's most comfortable for you. This brings us then to the Q&A. You've given your talk, you've survived the 15 minutes, and now it's time for questions. A few quick points here. One, never hesitate to take a moment to gather your thoughts. You can say, oh, wow, that's a great question. Let me think about that for a moment. You should also assume that questions are in good faith, even if they seem ignorant or even discourteous. Someone might try to skewer you when asking you a question, and I hope that doesn't happen, but conferencing is about interacting with the humans in academia, and sometimes humans can be dickish. So if they ask you a terrible question, you think about it and you answer that question earnestly. And then you vent about it later with your conference buddy. Got it? The only wrong answer to a question is I don't know, or I haven't thought about this at all. Even if somebody asks you something that's completely out of left field and you don't feel like you have a strong answer, you can still bring us somewhere close or adjacent, or just tell us your off the cuff reaction to that idea. But this brings me to the last point, which is if somebody asks you an out of pocket question, you can ask them to rephrase or restate a question. That is so fine. Arguably, you should almost always state a question back to the questioner. So you can say something like, oh, fascinating. So to make sure I'm with you, the question is about the implications that this has for XYZ. Taking a moment to say it back for them. That's also really good if you're in a room and you're the only one with a microphone and not everyone may have been able to hear the question that was asked. This brings me then to one of the biggest questions I got from you all in anticipation of this workshop. How do I structure a presentation based on a paper within the limited time frame? This is such an earnest question, and it's one that I'm only answering after years of suffering and having to cut lines from my talk at the very last minute. A few tips here. Number one, when proposing a talk for a conference, always keep the overall scope in mind. Something that often happens to my students who are working on their master's thesis or their dissertation is they'll be like, oh, I'll propose a talk about my master's thesis. And then they'll write up an abstract about their entire master's thesis. Do you really think that you can cover an entire thesis in the span of 15 minutes? Probably not. Instead, I'd encourage you to ask yourself, if you were to pull off everything you said in this talk, could you reasonably cover this content in 12 to 15 minutes? Is it possible you could propose a small portion of this study as a conference talk instead? And a lot of the times, the most successful graduate students, they'll take a research paper or project and they'll break it down into, okay, I'm going to take this literature review, I'm going to expand just the literature review a bit, and I'm going to pitch that as a conference talk. Then I'm going to think about my methodology really critically, and I'm going to spin that off as a conference talk. Then I'm going to think about the discussion and analysis, and that's going to be its own very important conference talk. If there's a way to slice up the cake so that you can serve more pieces, you should absolutely do that, if that metaphor lands. It's also a great idea to situate the talk in the overall arc of your research program. I know I keep saying that. You can keep this brief and avoid getting into too much specifics about your broader work. Give yourself a single slide or roughly a minute of context to catch us up. Think of this as the in case you missed season 1 high level recap. So, for example, when I give conference talks that are drawing from my ongoing book project, I often say something to the effect of, today I'll be drawing from an ongoing manuscript project I'm undertaking that explores trans game design and the so-called unplayable. In this talk, I want to focus in on some of my recent findings concerning anti-game movements. So I paint a broad picture of the big thing I'm doing and then immediately narrow it into the small thing I'm going to be focusing on in that talk. We've just saved ourselves like an hour and a half of me talking. I know y'all are thinking, how do I save myself from an hour and a half of you talking right now? Haha. Too bad you're stuck with me. All right. So now let's move on to the conference itself. The walking around and talking around of it. I'm going to talk about a few of the social rules that are kind of baked into conferencing. Specifically, there we go, PowerPoint. We're going to talk about a few of the soft things that don't always get talked about and that your supervisor may not have told you, hopefully they did, and that students often ask about, like, what do I wear? When you're on site, I recommend dressing in something that makes you feel comfortable and powerful. If applicable, you might wear something that you would teach in if you have a teaching appointment or if you've had a teaching appointment. Some conferences may expect formal attire, suits, dresses, suit jackets, but this has really shifted over the last handful of years. And I think presenters are much more often open to being expressive in their dress now. So wear something that makes you feel comfy and powerful. Second, I want to highlight that meals and drinks are common events at in-person conferences, and this can be a challenge for a lot of us. Bring plenty of comfort snacks, Google menus in advance, and have a go-to non-alcoholic drink order just in case you're sober. You don't want to be stressing out about sustaining your meat suit when you're also juggling human interactions. A few other social rules worth calling out. Although it varies by conference, it is generally considered rude to be multitasking while attending a conference panel. You ought to avoid working on other things while you're at a panel and or bring quiet fidgets with you when necessary. You will still see half a dozen people working on their talks while sitting in the audience for a panel, um, but it is considered rude. So don't if you can avoid it. Name tags at conferences are your very best friend. You can put your pronouns and or your name pronunciation on your tag if your name is hard to pronounce. My name is PB and people still mispronounce it. So, And then finally, it's worth noting that many conferences are still upholding mask mandates and or masks as like suggested safety measures. So something to consider when you're looking at conferences is what their requirements are. And even if it's not required, you might consider wearing one in crowded spaces as a kindness to others with immune sensitivities. So those are some of the soft rules, but I want to jump now into the more challenging part of being social at conferences, and that's networking. This was the thing I got the most questions about. So I'm going to do my best to give you some practical strategies here. But before we continue, I want to re-emphasize that you should not be fretting about schmoozing with all the fancy scholars whose work you cite and adore. Remember, our goal here ultimately is just to make one friend. That said, one other quick caveat. Networking, and especially strategizing for networking, can feel really weird and uncomfy and even evil, but it doesn't need to be. At the end of the day, academics are people too, and you can connect with them the same way you would connect with people generally, by being present and kind. Okay, let's get into it. Networking level 0. The easiest thing that you can do, go to panels. It is quite likely that a cohort of people will be attending panels on the same theme as you. If, for example, I'm at a game studies conference and I am an environmentalist and I go to an environmental game studies panel and then to another one on ecology and games, I'm probably going to start to see a lot of the same people over and over. You may start to recognize faces throughout the day. Say hello to the people in the row or at the table with you. And as you start to see them again and again, you build familiarity. Next thing you know, you end up all going out to lunch together. This is by far the easiest way to connect at conferences. That said, some other tips, we'll call this level 1. Ask your supervisor to help you with introductions. If there's someone you want to meet, ask your professor if they or one of their associates might be willing to make an introduction. I do this for my graduate students all the time. They'll come up to me, they'll be like, hey, that scholar over there, I want to meet them. It might feel uncomfortable. It might be a little weird. I kind of deliberately let it be weird. I'll take my grad student up to this person and be like, hi, so-and-so, this is my grad student. Introduce them and then be like, cool, well, I've done my job and introduced you. Have fun, and I'll just walk away. But it works. As long as you have the opportunity to say hello and introduce yourself and ask some questions about their work or tell them a bit about the work you're doing, that's the thing that matters. Another really easy tip that folks often miss, if you're on a panel, and particularly if it's not a pre-constituted panel, set up a dinner or a lunch or a get-together with your fellow panelists. One of the advantages of panels is that out of this whole scramble of people, the conference has put the 4 or 5 of you in a little group together because your work theoretically speaks to one another's. So propose you all go out to dinner and chat about your research after your panel. You're all going to be in the same place. It's kind of a natural event. And if you're the one to lead that, oftentimes panelists are grateful. So, pro tip. And then finally, go to network-specific events. Things like doctoral colloquiums are set up specifically to help you get acquainted with mentors in your field. So if your conference offers a pre-conference workshop or Q&A for emerging scholars, things like that, you can attend that. It's likely you're going to meet a bunch of other graduate students in a similar place to you. All right, we're going to level up again. This is level 2. Business cards have been shifting over the last handful of years. They were really important for a while. They weren't important during the pandemic, and now they're weirdly back again. So I personally recommend to all my students that they get a virtual business card that others can easily scan. Personally, I recommend Blink, but I'm going to link you to a couple of different resources in the handout I'm going to give you. I only recommend it because it's free, at least for the first two cards, and there are a lot of options out there. Likewise, if you have a social account that makes it easy to follow you, like Blue Sky or Discord or LinkedIn, you want to link that with your virtual business card. You want there to be an easy way for people to keep appraised of your work on an ongoing basis. And at some point here, I'm going to run another workshop on running academic socials, but that's for another time. And then lastly, this is really crucial, but it can be kind of nerve-wracking, which is why it's at level 2. Send follow-up greetings. If there are academics whose work you found inspiring or relevant, but you didn't get the chance to connect with them during the conference, and I should have added this here, or even if you did, send them a follow-up. In this message, know what you appreciated about their talk, ask a question, another typo, dang, I'll have to fix that before I upload these slides, or simply thank them for their ongoing work. So you might send a quick email just to be like, hi, Dr. So-and-so, I was at your panel. I was really inspired by this question. I do work on this and that, and so this has a lot of relevance for me. I just wanted to thank you. Sign your name, send it off. If you send that any time in the week after a conference, it is going to make somebody's day. Academics, even the big ones, aren't used to people noticing their work, as weird and sad as that is. And so they tend to get really excited when somebody like shouts them out and says, hey, actually, this is something valuable to me and I appreciate it. Finally, networking level 3. It's time to get tactical. Check the conference program in advance of the conference to see if there are academic programs or people you want to meet, and then ensure that you can be present at their panels. Another thing is if you're looking to potentially recruit an external committee member or meet an established scholar, this is going to sound really deviant, but I promise this is a really good strategy and it works. Consider locating and befriending their graduate students. This is not only a great way to get an introduction, potentially, it's also a really good way to get the tea on whether they're a good mentor to work with before you invite them to be an external committee member. When I was looking for my external committee members, I did this. I befriended all of the people I was thinking of. I befriended their graduate students. And I learned very quickly that a few of the folks who I was going to ask to be my mentor might not have been a good fit, and or I wasn't going to hear from them for a couple of years. Really good way to get some quick and easy insights. Um, Alrighty, and then finally, you can live post somebody's talk to your social media feed. If you're on Blue Sky or Mastodon or whatever we're replacing X/Twitter with these days, this is a practice where you can take pictures of or summarize somebody's talk as they are giving it. It's a very common practice at academic conferences. It's also a great thing for people to do for you. But effectively, you tag the person and you say, so-and-so is giving an excellent talk on these things. Here's what they say. It's a very easy way to kind of make a connection with that person and show that you're listening to their work, and they'll probably really appreciate it. And then finally, since we're talking about the conference and all the weird social dynamics, I do just want to take a moment to highlight something important, and that's that conferences are places where humans gather. And unfortunately, conferences can be sites of harassment, bullying, creepy, and predatory behavior. If something happens that makes you or one of your colleagues uncomfortable, it's good to know what to do in advance. Depending on the circumstance, you should always reach out immediately to your supervisor and or your conference buddy and inform them of the situation. But I also want you to know that most conferences will have a dedicated person to report issues of harassment to, such as an ombuds representative. And when no such person is available, you can always reach out to somebody on the organizing committee. Sometimes it'll be called the host committee, and inform them of the situation. where appropriate. I'm going to pause here for a moment, both because my computer just stalled out a tiny bit, and also because we're going to get into the questions now that you all asked me in anticipation of this workshop. So I want to pause really quickly if there are any questions about anything that we have covered thus far that folks want to pop into the chat. Going once. Going twice. Okay. Well, if any questions do come up, feel free to pop them in there. But for now, I'm going to go through the questions that y'all sent me in advance. The first one is my favorite, and that is it okay to skip some of a conference? Do you need to attend everything? Yeah, you do not have to go to everything. In fact, it is best if you don't go to everything. Conferences are often overstimulating and socially exhausting. That's why we set reasonable expectations for ourselves. That said, here are a couple of tricks that can help you know how to scope down a conference so you don't feel super overwhelmed. Number one is to mark panels or events as must see, want to see, and could be good. Don't fret if you don't make it to panels in the latter two categories. Check with yourself and your energy. Frankly, I think students who go to conferences and attend panels in every single session, which I certainly did when I first started, because I thought that's what you were supposed to do, you're going to have a terrible time and you're going to stop being able to retain anything on day two. That said, if you're planning to go off-site for a fun event, which I do recommend, conferences often take place in cities and it's an excuse to travel, consider inviting some of your new colleagues or other attendees with you. Hey, I'm going to check out this arcade, museum, art exhibit, restaurant. Do you want to come with? Oftentimes, you'll get a little group of 5 to 6 scholars together and you can all go. And it's a great way to form connections with these people. That said, just don't be the person who asks, hey, I'm heading to this arcade. You want to come with to somebody right before their panel, making it clear that you're not going. I have seen this happen many times before. It's always a little awkward. So, be thoughtful, but it is okay to take time away from the conference or time outside of the conference and do some sightseeing or some rot time and R&R, whatever it is you need. And then finally, most conferences will have a quiet room or a space where you can chill out between panels and events. Worst case, you might plan a trip back to your hotel or a nearby cafe with a buddy for some needed recovery. But yes, it is not expected that you go to everything. That's why in our rule of one, our goal is to see one good panel or go to one good event each day. If that's all you do, that's okay. Another rule that I've heard colleagues use is make sure you go to at least one panel that isn't your own. I think that's a fine rule too. I think we can set the bar a little higher than that, but just so you know where the standard is at. The other question, how do I prepare for a conference presentation that's a bit last minute? Well, a few things. First of all, remember you're in good company. A lot of established academics, quite frankly, are finishing their talks on the plane to the event. Some of them are maybe even starting their talks on the plane to the event. So you're not alone. There will be a frenetic energy at most conferences as people scramble to finish their talks. That said, you can always leverage the materials that you have on hand. If you have a paper written, you can be copying and pasting sentences. Also, as you're developing your projects, make sure that you're getting pictures and screenshots of things with the eventual conference talk that you'll be giving in mind, so you can throw those in when you need them. Have a go-to presentation template that you can make easy use of. This is one I really recommend for folks. Once you find a PowerPoint or Google Slides template that really works for you and that you're comfortable with, marry it and whip it out anytime you need. Then start small. It's better to scope down your talk than try and scramble through too much content. So like we said before, if you're putting together a talk and it's the 11th hour and you've made it through the first of your conclusions, but there's a whole section of your paper left to go, that'll just have to be another talk. Make sure though that you give us, a fulfilling arc of something, even if it's not everything you wanted to get through. And finally, if the turnaround for the conference is quick and the project itself hasn't made much progress, remember what we talked about earlier in the context of forward-looking talks. Another thing that has come up, how do I keep my audience engaged during my talk? Uh, my best tip here is don't try too hard. By this I mean engagement can look like a lot of different things. People at conferences are fried. They are exhausted, and it might look like they're not paying attention. My recommendation is to give your audience some productive distractions. Putting things like subtle animations or memes or graphics or photos or things in your slideshow, I actually find to be really helpful because rather than getting distracted on their phone, they might distractedly look at, I don't know, the meme you have on the screen or something, and then their attention will eventually snap back later. But at least you've held their attention in some form in your presentation along the way. So that's my first big tip here is build the distractions into your talk so that they don't get distracted by things that aren't your talk. That said, it's going to take time to find your presentation voice. Practice it. Guest lectures and mock presentations are a great opportunity to do that. There are also ways of encouraging subtle audience participation and maintaining a conversational tone. You can ask for shows of hands, you can joke with the audience, or in a pro move, you can call out connections to the panelists who have presented before you and help ground folks in the panel and the talk. That said, make sure above all else that your takeaway and your introduction are really clear. These are the parts of your presentation that folks need to remember who you are and what is the thing they're supposed to walk away with from your project. And then the last thing here, a lot of people nowadays take pictures of folks' presentations as they're giving them because they know they aren't going to remember everything. So they just want to snap a photo of it. So it's good if you can design your slides to be photographed. How many conferences should I aim to attend during my program? This is a super fair and can be a challenging question. I have two answers here. Obviously, this totally depends on your life and your research program, but I tend to tell my master's students that one conference per academic year of their program is a great goal. So for most of you, if your master's degree is 2 years, that would be 2 conferences by the time you graduate. If you're a thesis student doing 3 or 4 years, then 3 or 4 conferences by the time you graduate is a great goal to have. For PhD students, I say 1 conference per term that you're active as a student is a good goal. So for full-time students, that might be 2 a year if you're active in fall and winter. If you do fall, winter, and spring, summer, then maybe call that 3 a year. Obviously, these conferences can be a mix of scopes and sizes. So maybe you present at a symposium at the university for one, and then try to get to 1 national or international conference a year. Relatedly, another question we got, can I propose a paper to multiple conferences? I love the evil scheming, but the short answer here is no. And the long answer here is no, asterisks. It is fine to propose the same project to multiple conferences, but giving the same talk is highly frowned upon. The exception here is that it's fine and even encouraged to give a talk at an internal conference or symposium and still give that talk at a regional or national or international conference. So if you present something at U of A, it doesn't count really in terms of it's not plagiarism then if you go and or not plagiarism, it's not repeating yourself necessarily to go and present that somewhere else. Folks view internal conferences as an opportunity to refine these ideas. Relatedly, I'm new to U of A and to Canada. Where do I get started finding conferences? First of all, welcome. Second of all, come on, PowerPoint, you can do it. We're almost there. One more slide left. Start local. There are symposiums, research forums, and departmental conferences all over the university. You might also consider starting with some of the regional conferences. It's a great way to connect with other scholars in the Canadian research ecosystem. One of the ones that's most recommended by my colleagues is the Canadian Communication Association, for example. Uh, and also, I will point out that this is a wonderful excuse to get connected. I myself am a recovering American. And so when I mentioned to people that I'm relatively new to the Canadian research scene, folks have been incredibly generous in being like, oh, well, we need to introduce you to so and so and so and so and get you involved in these new organizations. So it's perfectly fine to be like, hi, I'm a graduate student. I'm relatively new to this subfield, or it's my first time at this conference. If anything, that can be a good way to get folks to take you under their wing and help guide you a bit. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment here, and I am going to put a link in the chat for you all. I've compiled some resources for everyone to go alongside with this presentation. I'm going to give you a quick overview of those and what they are. So let me just throw this up. There we are. Hopefully everyone can see these. So I've put together, first of all, a couple of examples of the different kinds of trackers that I mentioned earlier. First and foremost, in the first tab here, the DH/Media Studies Conference Tracker. Again, these are primarily for the students that I teach across my departments. But I have put together here a list of all 23 of the major and minor conferences in digital humanities and media studies that might be relevant to any of you. We have broken these down by what season do these conferences normally happen in? What are their organizations links? Are they an in-person conference, a hybrid conference? And we've tagged them with a handful of things. So is this a prestigious conference? Is it a relaxed conference? Is it one that's known for being supportive of graduate students? Is it not? Whether or not the specific media studies conferences are relevant to you, this is a template that I hope you find effective. I'm also realizing I need this to, there we go. Switching to the right tab in my sharing. So this is the template and what it looks like. You'll also note my colleagues and I have made notes here. If there's a connection between a faculty member here on campus and any of these conferences. And we've also noted things like if these conferences have listservs or Discord groups that you can potentially join to get more information. So hopefully this is a valuable resource if you're looking for a conference to potentially send your work to. And I also hope, even if these conferences aren't relevant, you might think about making a copy of this spreadsheet and passing it around between the other graduate students and faculty members in your own department and making something similar. Because resources like this can really, really help folks be aware of the different opportunities that are out there. Popping back then to our main tab, I've put together a couple of other more technical things. First of all, we have a compilation here of different guides and resources on preparing the abstract for submission in response to CFPs. So if you're interested in sending an abstract to a conference, these are some very specific how-to guides that go over many of the things we've talked about here. But if you want like a worksheet, for example, or you want to watch another video, opportunities there. I've also linked you to a handful of different tools for putting together slides and talks. I am told that a lot of the kids these days are using Slides Go for their presentation templates. It has really effective, lightweight, minimalist presentation templates. I would just be wary of its AI tools. Folks have a lot of strong feelings about AI generated presentations, so I wouldn't trouble those waters if you can avoid it, but the templates are wonderful. I've here some example presentations from the Generation Analog Conference, as well as a really, really great set of libraries for royalty-free images if you're looking for images to put in your presentations. And then finally, 2 different virtual business card tools, much like those we talked about. On the left here, I give you an example table for the CFP tracker that I showed during the presentation earlier. And then finally, I've compiled a list of 3 different sample abstracts of different lengths. So each of these are annotated with little comments here on the side so you can see what they were for and with what context. And then finally, I put the best practice tips from the professors in the various departments here in a tab for you all to take a gander at if you're looking for some more insights on what it's like to do academic conferencing. So hopefully this is useful as a resource to all of you. That's a really great question. Yeah, thanks for asking that, Summer. So the question here is, how formal should you be when you approach somebody at a conference? Like, for example, do you use honorifics or do you just use first names? This really depends on the context, I think, of the introduction. If this is somebody you are being introduced to, then I would follow suit with however they have been introduced to you. So, for example, if your supervisor introduces you to this person and they say, "This is Alicia," then you can say, "Hi, Alicia." You don't need to say, "Hi, doctor," whatever. That said, if you're approaching somebody kind of cold turkey and you're just going up and talking to them, I recommend defaulting to formal honorifics, and they will likely correct you if they prefer to be addressed on a first name basis. But I could see somebody potentially getting the wrong idea if you come off as overfamiliar. Yeah, and students will do both. The one thing that I will say here is that often women and gender diverse folks are more likely to be addressed informally when they want to be addressed formally. And so it's often better as an equity thing just to not take that risk. In my case, for example, when I introduce myself to students, I say, "Hi, you can call me PB." But that doesn't mean I don't get Dr. Berge here and there, and I think you run much less risk going that way. Um, we also have a great question here from Emily. Feels like maybe a silly question. No silly questions. Is it normal to attend a conference, even if you're not presenting my own research, as a way to get a bit more immersed in the field? Absolutely. In fact, it's a great thing to do because you get all the benefits of conferencing, going to panels, hanging out with people, enjoying tasty meals, and you don't have the stress of having to give an actual presentation. Obviously, the big downside there is you don't get the CV line or the opportunity to present your research. But everything that we've been talking about here, minus the talk, still applies. You can still show up. You can still be asking really great questions. You can still be meeting folks and going to social events and things. The only thing there is it can be more difficult to get things like travel funding to attend conferences if you're not presenting directly. Great question. Really appreciate your time and coming out today. I hope you learned something new. Again, if you have any questions, I'm going to hang out for just another moment. I'm more than happy to chat with you. Otherwise, just make sure you fill out this form on your way out and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.